Golden skies, red dust. The sky above Altharion was forever golden, not the brilliance of triumph, but the dull, muted hue of a cage too old to notice. For centuries it had been the quiet, unwanted corner of the Threx Dominion's vast empire, a backwater planet left to fester under gilded clouds and forgotten suns. But the gold was a lie. It smeared itself across the scorched earth like a veil, masking the cries that trembled beneath it. The cries of the enslaved, the broken, the forgotten. Beneath the glowing sky, the overseer's whip cracked again. A Xerion child stumbled under its bite. His ration sphere spilled into the dust lost. The overseer laughed, a guttural, careless sound as the child whimpered. Around them, hundreds of others bowed their heads lower, knowing better than to intervene, knowing that hope was poison here. Except for Kyle. He moved before he could think. The lash descended and Kyle caught it with his forearm, the braided metal slicing through his skin. The overseer's eyes narrowed in amusement. Without a word, they dragged Kyle to the punishment pit. There were no speeches here, no warnings, only the lash and the dust it stirred. Chained to the cracked stone, Kyle gritted his teeth as blow after blow rained down. Blood mixed with the dirt beneath him, staining the false gold of the ground. Overhead, the twin suns mocked him with their serene warmth. His body betrayed him, shuddering, twitching. But inside, something old and furious stirred. A memory not his own. His mother's voice whispered through the haze of pain. "If they ever break you, Kyle, you remember who you are. You are my son, and my father was human." He had never seen Earth, had barely believed it existed at all. Just a myth among slaves, a ghost story. But as the overseer's laughter faded into a dull roar in his ears, Kyle felt it, a pulse low and deep, threading through his bones, a remembrance written into blood and marrow. They thought they had broken him. They had only woken something far older. Across the ruined sectors of the Dominion, other enslaved species whispered when they dared in ventilation shafts and supply lines in the forgotten gutters of civilization. Whispered about Earth, about a people who once crossed the stars not to conquer, but to survive. About a people who bent for no empire, no throne. But Earth had been silent for so long. No ships, no transmissions, no vengeance. The galaxy had buried the legends under layers of bureaucracy and blood. Until now, Kyle lay gasping in the dust as the overseer dragged him toward the execution pits. Around them, the golden clouds swirled lazily indifferent. The other prisoners turned their faces away, too beaten to watch, too hollowed to hope. And somewhere, light years beyond the shattered wormholes and decaying jump gates, Earth stirred. Not with noise, not with banners, but with a silence so sharp, so absolute, that the commanders of Luna Base froze when they heard it. Not a declaration, not a plea. One word barely audible carried on a broken mining drone's emergency beacon. Help, a whisper perhaps. But on Earth, whispers carried weight. Whispers started storms. On the dark side of the moon, under the scarred hulls of Luna Command, ancient engines roared awake shipyards that had stood dormant since the last contact wars blazed into life. Titans of black steel unfurled like angry gods. The world had forgotten Earth, but Earth had not forgotten its own. And when Earth answered, it did not come like diplomats, it came like thunder. The signal heard round the stars. On Luna Base's main command deck, silence gripped the room harder than any gravity well. Generals, analysts, old warfighters, men and women who had witnessed the fall of colonies and the burning of distant moons stood frozen as the broken transmission played again. Help, not a command, not a call to arms, just the raw, bleeding voice of need. General Varun, battle-scarred and steel-eyed, stood at the center. His fingers curled into a fist against the polished holotable. Around him, strategic advisors murmured in confusion. "Could be a trap," one whispered. "Old data, a ghost signal," another suggested. Varun said nothing. He looked at the map, at the coordinates flickering weakly from a dead sector, labeled simply Altharion. A sector no one had spoken of in decades. A sector believed empty, lost to the arrogance of history. But Varun had been raised differently. Raised to remember that Earth owed debts, and it paid them no matter the distance, no matter the cost. He slammed his fist onto the activation console. The command echoed like a gunshot across the deck. Mobilize the fleet. No debate. No diplomacy. Across the dark side of the moon, hidden in craters, deep enough to swallow mountains, launch bays rumbled awake. Ancient dreadnoughts shook free the dust of centuries. Combat pods were stacked in gleaming towers, armed by hands steady with purpose, by soldiers who had memorized the names of fallen colonies in silence. They wore no flags, no colors. Their armor was black as midnight, etched only with a single blood-red emblem over their shoulders. A clenched hand, a promise. Pilots who had once been orphans of forgotten wars climbed into cockpits. Infantry born in orbital slums trained in vacuum combat locked their helmets and whispered prayers, not for survival, but for vengeance. Earth did not send envoys. It sent judgment. As the first dreadnought, Vigilant Rain powered its grav cores and thundered skyward, news spread through the underground networks across Earth and her scattered moons. The silence has ended. On Ceres Station, miners dropped their drills and saluted the burning horizon. On Titan, engineers paused, staring at old forgotten flags stitched into their uniforms. Across the solar colonies, humanity moved wordless, but united like muscle fibers, twitching before a punch. This was not a war of conquest, it was a reckoning. Meanwhile on Altharian, Kyle coughed blood into the dust, barely conscious. The Overseer's laughter scraped the air like broken metal. "No one's coming for you," he sneered, dragging Kyle's limp body toward the execution pits. "Your people died with their pride." Kyle could barely hear him, could barely see, but something deeper moved in his chest, something older than fear, harder than hope. His blood, half Xerion, half human, called out not in words, but in the iron pulse of survival. Above them, the golden sky, so soft and still, for centuries began to crack. It started as a ripple, a distortion, as if the heavens themselves were recoiling. Then came the sound, not a scream, not a blast, but the low, deafening roar of gravity tearing apart. The Overseer looked up, confusion blooming into horror. Prisoners gasped, shields shaded their eyes. Overseers fumbled for weapons they hadn't needed in decades. Through the fractured clouds, black pods streaked down like falling stars. Hundreds of them, their hulls burning with re-entry fire. The first anti-air batteries woke too slowly. Rusted, unmanned, or sabotaged by time, their defenses cracked like paper against the tide. And the black rain fell. The first pod hit the labor camp's courtyard, shattering reinforced concrete. A Dominion guard barely had time to scream before the pod crushed him into the ground. With a hiss of pressurized air, the pod doors opened, and out stepped a human soldier. Tall, armored in black, his eyes burned under the visor, cold with fury that had crossed galaxies. He didn't speak, didn't posture. He raised his rifle, matte black, ancient and lethal, and ferocious. The Overseer screamed orders. Prisoners cowered. Dominion guards fired blind volleys into the smoke. It didn't matter. They were too slow, too arrogant, too late. Above them, more pods slammed into the fields, into the fortifications, into the watchtowers. Each impact a drumbeat in a symphony of vengeance. Kyle, lying broken in the dirt, watched through blurred eyes as the impossible unfolded. He felt his heartbeat sinking with the thunder. And for the first time in years, Kyle cried, not from pain, from something far more dangerous. Hope. Thunder descends. The golden sky of Altharian, once so smug in its stillness, shattered completely. Thunder rolled, not from clouds, but from falling war machines. Black pods streaked down like celestial hammers, punching craters into the earth, leaving trails of fire and molten air. The sound was not like any storm Altharian had ever known. It was a storm of endings. Kyle blinked against the dust, stinging his torn eyes. Around him, chaos reigned. Dominion guards shouted, firing blind into the smoke, their discipline collapsing under the weight of terror. Overseers scrambled for cover, their once proud uniforms stained with fear. And through it all, the humans advanced. The first soldier, the one Kyle had seen step from the pod, moved like inevitability, given flesh. Every step was measured, every shot precise. He didn't waste a bullet. He didn't waste a breath. His black armor was scarred and scorched, a testament to 100 battles. Survived, but it was not armor that made him terrifying. It was the fury beneath it, the cold, burning fury that crossed stars to find them. The soldier swept across the courtyard, his rifle roaring death. One by one, Dominion guards dropped. Their shock spears, their plasma carbines. None of it mattered. Human armor absorbed their fury and returned it tenfold. A second pod slammed into the western wall of the labor camp, its impact sending Overseers sprawling. The doors hissed open and a woman emerged. Her armor was crimson black, a shimmer of blood and shadow. She moved with deadly grace, issuing orders through a crackling comlink. Alpha Team, secure the detainees. Prioritize human-blooded, engage all hostiles, no survivors. Her voice was like a blade drawn across stone. Kyle tried to move his body, screaming in protest. He barely managed to lift his head when a shadow fell over him. He braced for pain for the Overseer's whip, but instead strong hands lifted him from the dirt. The human soldier. The first one. Without hesitation, he slung Kyle over his shoulder like a brother rescued from a battlefield. Kyle tried to speak, but the man only said one thing, voice low and hard as iron. "You're safe now, brother." The word brother struck Kyle harder than any lash. He wasn't from Earth. He was half-blooded, a cast-off. But to this man, he was enough. All across the camp, the black storm raged, smoke coiled into the sky. Dominion enforcers broke ranks, firing in every direction, their fear palpable. They weren't just losing, they were unraveling. One guard, a towering brute with 4 arms and a shock spear, charged the human soldier carrying Kyle. Without even glancing, the man drew a pistol from his hip and fired backward. One shot clean through the brute's skull. The body crumpled without ceremony. The woman in red armor, the squad leader, moved among the chaos, marking targets, coordinating strikes. Her soldiers worked like a machine, fast, efficient, merciless. Kyle saw prisoners being herded into safe zones, medical pods dropped like seeds of hope. And it wasn't just humans they were saving. Any species the Dominion had brutalized, Zerion Talari, even broken old Vorni, were pulled from the ruins and shielded with human bodies. Earth had come not just for its children, it had come for everyone. Kyle was handed off to a medic, a human with light armor, his hands quick and sure. He injected something cold into Kyle's veins, wrapped the worst wounds, and nodded sharply. "Stay with us," he said, "your family now." Kyle's vision blurred again, but it wasn't from blood loss this time. It was from the unbearable weight of something he hadn't felt since he was a child, clutching imaginary dreams. Belonging. Somewhere in the command center, Overseer Krell watched the monitors glitch and die. He slammed clawed fists onto the console. "This isn't possible," he shrieked. Earth was dead, contained, forgotten. His aide, a pale-skinned Osari, trembled behind him. "Sir, their technology, it's generations beyond our projections. They're jamming our comms, disabling orbital defenses. They've hit 3 camps simultaneously." "Shut up," Krell roared, spinning toward the observation window. Beyond the cracked glass, more pods fell like meteors, each one another nail in the Dominion's coffin. "They won't stop," Krell whispered, claws digging into the metal sill. "They won't stop until we're dust." And he was right. Across Eltharion, across the forgotten fringes of Sector 94, humanity fell from the heavens, not as conquerors, but as reckoning incarnate. Anti-air defenses crumbled. Command structures folded. Dominion war banners were ripped from their poles and burned in the streets by liberated prisoners. Kyle, wrapped in a rescue blanket, sat dazed against a medical tent pole. Above him, the sky still glowed gold. But through it now, he saw fire ships cutting dark scars across the heavens. Fighters racing between broken clouds like angry wasps. Humanity in full force. They hadn't come because they had to. They had come because someone cried out. And Earth answered with thunder. Sparks of revolution. The fires of liberation spread faster than the Dominion could understand, let alone contain. In the crumbling fields around the labor camps, humanity moved like a dark tide. Squads of black-armored soldiers surged through broken barriers and shattered gates. Their weapons spoke in short, brutal bursts. Their boots crushed the banners of the Threx overlords into the mud without a glance. Everywhere they landed, the same pattern unfolded, a sharp surgical strike to the heart of Dominion power, followed by swift, overwhelming extraction of prisoners. There was no posturing, no speeches, no mercy. It wasn't a battle, it was a purge. Kyle watched from the med-evac zone as the black tide swallowed the camp where he had spent his entire life, shackled by invisible chains. He saw humans, not just soldiers, but medics, engineers, even translators, moving among the caves like controlled storms. One medic crouched beside a wounded Talari boy, patching his broken arm with the same urgency as if he were her own blood. Another soldier lifted an old Vorni woman onto his back, carrying her across burning wreckage without hesitation. This wasn't just war. This was retribution wrapped in salvation. Kyle tried to rise, but the exobrace clamped around his ribs, hissed a warning. His body was broken, still too weak. He clenched his fists helplessly. He hated feeling useless, hated watching others fight for him. That was when a figure approached the woman in the blood-red armor. She pulled off her helmet, revealing a face sharp with focus eyes like flint under storm gray hair. "Name," she demanded. "Kyle," he rasped, "son of Tan, half Zerion, half." "Human enough," she interrupted briskly. "You're coming with us." He stared at her, bewildered. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because we don't leave family behind." 2 human soldiers hoisted Kyle between them, careful but fast, moving him toward the extraction zone. Overhead dropships dipped low engines, howling against the smoke-choked sky. In the command tower, Overseer Krell screamed orders into dead comm units. His face twisted in impotent rage as he watched pod after pod descend, each one another hammer blow against his crumbling empire. "Send reinforcements," he shrieked. "Sir, there are none left," whimpered the Osari aide. "They've taken the outer camps. The orbital batteries are offline. The wormholes are severed." Krell staggered back. Stunned, in all the centuries of Dominion rule, no enemy had ever struck this deep. No rebellion had dared. He had forgotten one truth carved deep into the bones of history. You don't leave Earth's children to rot. The evacuation was fast, brutal, efficient. Kyle barely registered being loaded onto a medical ship, its black hull emblazoned with no flags. Only the broken chain insignia of Earth's Liberation Corps. Inside, the air smelled of oil, blood, and something he could barely identify: hope. Kyle drifted in and out of consciousness during the flight. In flashes, he saw fields of liberated prisoners, Zerion, Talari Vorni, human bloods, huddling under emergency tents, receiving care from stern silent medics. He heard children laughing, their laughter brittle but real. He saw the prisoners, the forgotten, the discarded lifted into shuttles, their chains falling away like dead skin. Not slaves anymore, survivors. And Kyle realized something bone deep and terrible. Earth hadn't just come for revenge, it had come to rebuild. Hours later, Kyle stood shakily on the deck of a mobile command base perched atop Altherion's scorched cliffs. Before him loomed the temporary field headquarters, a sea of black tents, armored transports, and humming data towers. No palaces, no banners, no monuments, just raw functional life. A young officer, the woman from earlier, approached, reading from a datapad. "Kyle, son of Tan Half-Zerion, confirmed human lineage through maternal bloodline," she recited. He nodded numbly. "You were listed as deceased," she added, lowering the pad. "Lost in the collapse of Colony 13. Your mother, Tan of Resistance, Cell Red, was executed for sedition. Your father, Zerion slave miner, died under forced labor protocols." Kyle flinched. Hearing it stated so clinically, so brutally, carved something deep in him. "You shouldn't be alive," she said. "I'm not sure I am," Kyle whispered. The officer studied him a moment, then gestured toward a massive black tent in the center of the camp. "Command wants to see you." Inside, the air was cooler, heavy, with the scent of ozone and burnt circuitry. Holomaps floated midair, flashing real-time battle data across Altherion and beyond. At the center stood a man, General Royce Verun. He turned slowly to face Kyle, a giant of a man. His armor battered, his beard streaked with gray, his face lined with scars that read like a history of every war Earth had ever fought. "Welcome home," Verun said simply. Kyle swallowed hard. "Home I've never even seen, Earth." "You don't have to," Varun replied. "Earth isn't just a planet, it's a bloodline, a memory, a promise." Kyle's legs almost buckled under the weight of those words. "Why now?" he whispered. "Why come back after all this time?" Vern's gaze hardened. "Because the galaxy thought we were dead," he said. "Because they took our children, because you cried out." Kyle shook his head weakly. "I didn't send any signal." "You didn't have to," Varun said, voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Someone did. And that's enough." Behind them, a holoscreen flickered, showing hundreds of liberation sites lighting up across Altherion. Not a war, a reckoning. Kyle closed his eyes and let the weight settle. Not because it crushed him, because it lifted him, awakening the bloodline. Kyle didn't sleep that night. The painkillers dulled his body, but not his mind. He sat outside the command tent, wrapped in a thermal blanket, staring up at the broken sky. Fires still burned across Altherion's horizon. The golden clouds that once mocked him now glowed blood red, stitched with trails of human warships. For the first time in his life, Kyle wondered what Earth really looked like. Not the myth, not the memory, but the home he had never seen. Footsteps crunched the gravel beside him. Kyle turned to see the officer from earlier. The woman in red armor dropped down into a crouch beside him. "Juno Pina," she said, offering her name like a handshake. "Squad Leader 3rd Echo Division." "Kyle?" he answered simply, voice still rough from dust and blood. They sat in silence for a long moment, breathing the smoky air. "You fought back," Juno said finally. "Not many do." Kyle chuckled bitterly. Didn't feel like fighting, felt like surviving. She shrugged. "Same thing some days?" Then softer. "Tomorrow we hit the Citadel." Kyle tensed. Everyone knew about the Citadel, the Dominion's stronghold on Altherion. A fortress, city where prisoners vanished, records were altered, history rewritten, the heart of every lie. "We're going to take it," Juno said, her voice steel, "and tear their truths out by the roots." Kyle said nothing, but inside something old and furious coiled tighter. At dawn, the humans moved like shadows across the scorched plains. Dropships sleek and silent, ferried squads toward the Citadel's looming spires. No battle cries, no banners, only the deadly certainty of a hammer falling. Kyle stood among them, armor clumsy on his bruised body, the exosuit wrapped around his frame, automatically adjusting to his injuries, syncing with his weakened muscles. It wasn't polished like the others, it was practical, rugged, a tool, not a trophy. Juno handed him a rifle. "You probably won't need it," she said, "but keep it ready." Kyle stared at the weapon in his hands. He had never fired one, never even held one before today. It felt alien heavy yet somehow familiar, like it belonged there. "I've never shot anything before," he confessed. Juno gave a half-smile, grim and understanding. "You'll know when it's time." The dropship ride to the Citadel was deathly quiet. The squad checked their weapons and gear with mechanical precision. No jokes, no last words. Just the rhythm of people who had accepted what waited for them. As they approached, Kyle glimpsed the Citadel through the dropship's viewport. It was a monolith of black stone and cold steel, towering over the ruins like a sneer. Banners of the Dominion whipped from its walls, symbols of pride now stained by smoke. "They built it to last forever," Juno said quietly beside him. "We're going to make sure it doesn't." The ship touched down without a sound. Humanity didn't announce itself anymore. It simply arrived. The outer defenses of the Citadel were already down. Hacking teams had infiltrated the Dominion's grid hours before disabling turrets, jamming comms, slicing through encrypted gates. No alarm screamed, no reinforcements poured out. The humans slipped into the fortress like a blade between ribs. Inside, the Citadel was pristine, almost untouched by the chaos. Outside, marble floors gleamed under cold lights. Walls bore the faces of Dominion, heroes, slavers, murderers, tyrants, immortalized in gold. Kyle walked among them, feeling a rage so cold it numbed him. This was where they recorded the names they thought would last forever. This was where they erased people like him from history. The squad split into fire teams, each with assigned objectives: secure archives, capture data at the cores, disable remaining defenses. Every movement was swift, ruthless, precise. Kyle found himself drifting down a side corridor marked classified biolineage storage. The doors hissed open at his approach, as if recognizing the blood in his veins. Inside, rows of cryopods stretched into the gloom, each one humming softly. Some were empty, some still occupied. Screens blinked with data, genetic records, lineage charts, compatibility, logs. Kyle approached one and read the display with growing horror. Subject 4321, a half-Terran mining colony. 13 status incompatible, rejected, discarded. His stomach twisted. This wasn't research. It was a trophy room, a morgue of hope. Dozens, hundreds of human descendants, judged, discarded, exterminated, without a whisper reaching the outside worlds. His fist tightened until the armor creaked. Over the comms, Juno's voice crackled. "Kale, fall back! Dominion armor, inbound west corridor." Kyle turned sharply. He sprinted back toward the rally point, lungs burning, muscles screaming. Pain lanced up his spine with every step, but he didn't stop. In the west corridor, the squad was pinned behind collapsed columns. 3 Threx-class siege walkers, massive dual-cannon monsters, trundled forward, shredding cover with plasma fire. Juno fired over the debris, teeth gritted. "We need anti-tank now." Kyle skidded to a halt behind her. His HUD blinked warnings at him, mapping enemies, allies, casualties. He spotted it, a fallen Dominion guard, a shoulder-fired rocket launcher just a few meters away. Instinct overrode fear. Before Juno could stop him, Kyle broke cover, sprinting into the open. "Kale, no!" she screamed. He hit the ground, sliding through dust and plasma. Hands shaking, he grabbed the launcher, whirled, locked on, and fired. The rocket screamed through the air and slammed dead center into the lead siege walker. The explosion lit up the corridor like a second sun. Metal shrieked as the walker staggered, then collapsed in a heap of molten wreckage. Kyle coughed smoke from his lungs and reloaded. Another shot, another impact. The second walker detonated, spraying slag and broken armor across the hall. The third walker turned its guns toward him, too slow. Twin sniper shots cracked from the mezzanine above, punching holes through its command core. It dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. Silence felt broken only by the ragged breaths of the survivors. Juno reached Kyle, hauling him to his feet. "That was insane," she said, half laughing, half scolding. Kyle wiped blood from his mouth. Wasn't going to let them take anyone else. She stared at him, really stared for the first time. Not like a victim, not like a half-blood, but like a soldier. "Get used to this feeling," she said. "What feeling?" Kyle rasped. "Fighting back," she said, her voice fierce and winning. And under the burning walls of the Citadel, Kyle finally understood what it meant to be human. burning the old world. The stars above Varnaxis Prime shimmered cold and distant, unaware of the storm about to break. From orbit, the planet looked pristine, a glittering world of silver cities in perfect symmetry, guarded by orbital cannons and Dominion dreadnoughts, a fortress carved from arrogance and cruelty, a monument to those who believed they could rule forever. Humanity was about to remind them otherwise. The fleet assembled above the dark side of Varnaxis was a living eclipse. 10 carriers, 16 dreadnoughts, 4,000 strike pods. And not just humans, every species the Dominion had broken. Beaten and enslaved, now sent ships flying. Earth's new banner, a broken chain, ringed in stars. Kyle stood on the deck of the vigilant Rain Earth's flagship, his black and red armor gleaming under the warlights. Beside him, Juno adjusted the straps of her gear, her face bruised but burning with purpose. "You're ready for this?" she asked. "No," Kyle said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." She grinned. "Good, that's the right answer." In the command center, General Varun stared down at the tactical displays. His face was carved in stone, his voice low and certain as he spoke to the fleet. "We don't fight for conquest," he said. "We fight for memory, for every child stolen, for every name erased, for every scream they tried to silence. Today we end the Dominion's lie." Across the fleet, thousands of soldiers clenched their fists, touched their weapons, whispered oaths. Kyle stepped into his pod. His name was stenciled across the hatch in crimson. Kyle Shattered Line. The pod systems hummed around him, wrapping him in the cold embrace of controlled fury. His squad, the Shattered Line, were already locked in faces, grim eyes burning. These weren't soldiers of Empire. They were survivors, wielding their scars like blades. Launch, the command came, and the pods fired, hundreds, thousands of them. Black spears hurtling toward Varnaxis Prime, trailing fire across the void. The Dominion's defenses woke in panic. Orbital cannons screamed to life. Dreadnoughts repositioned. Fighters scrambled. But it was too late. Humanity's AI jammed targeting systems, hacked defense grids, mid-activation. Chaos blossomed inside the Dominion's finest fortress. Kyle's pod ripped through the atmosphere like a meteor. The ground below resolved into the sprawling spires of the Dominion capital. Its center dominated by the palace spire, a tower of polished glass and white stone, stretching 200 stories into the poison sky. "Our blood built that tower," Kyle thought grimly. "Let it fall while we watch." His pod slammed into the central plaza, carving a crater into marble and gold. The hatch blew open. Kyle stepped into the fire. The Sovereign Guard met them, elite Dominion soldiers in shining armor, armed with plasma halberds and shock shields. For a heartbeat, the two forces stared at each other across the smoke. Then Kyle moved. The Shattered Line surged forward, black and red, and rage incarnate. Plasma fire seared the air. Shock spears crackled. Blades clashed against armor. Kyle fought like a storm unleashed. He ducked under a halberd swing, drove his rifle butt into a guard's throat, pivoted and fired point blank into another's visor. His body remembered every chain, every lash, every broken promise, and returned them all tenfold. Beside him, Juno moved with lethal grace, twin short blades carving arcs of crimson through the air. She took a cut across her thigh but didn't slow, didn't even flinch. "Forward!" Kyle roared. "We take the tower now." They pressed upward, level by level, every floor a battlefield. At the 75th floor, they found a child, half human, half Talari, curled behind a cracked glass wall. Kyle smashed the barrier with his armored fist and lifted the child into his arms. "You're safe," he whispered. The child looked up at him, eyes wide and hollow. "Where's home?" Kyle swallowed the lump in his throat. He didn't answer. He just held the child tighter. At the top of the spire, the 13 sovereigns waited, the rulers of the Dominion, clad in ceremonial armor, their eyes cold with disbelief. High Chancellor Velik, tall and silver-scaled, stepped forward, sneering. "So this is what Earth sends," he spat. "A mongrel army and fire. Earth is still a primitive rock, hiding behind myths." Kyle lowered his rifle, walked forward alone. "No," he said, voice carrying through the burning air. "Earth is memory, and memory doesn't die." Velik laughed, but it was hollow, desperate. Kyle pulled a small device from his belt, a data crystal, and jammed it into the tower's mainframe. Across every screen, every broadcast channel, every Dominion world images appeared. The prisons, the labs, the executions, the experiments, the truth laid bare, raw and bleeding. "You ended yourselves," Kyle said. The city below erupted. Freed slaves poured into the streets, overpowering stunned Dominion soldiers, tearing down statues, setting fire to the palaces built on their bones. The sovereigns drew weapons, roaring in fury. Kyle dropped his rifle. He wanted this to be personal. Velik lunged. Kyle met him mid-charge, slamming a fist into his gut, driving him backward. Plasma daggers flashed, slicing shallow wounds. But Kyle didn't care. He fought with fists, knees, elbows. Pure rage, pure history unleashed. He beat Velik to the floor again and again until the High Chancellor's silver blood stained the white marble black. Behind him, Juno limped to his side, blood streaking her face. "It's done," she rasped. Kyle shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered, "it started." They didn't plant a flag. They didn't hold a ceremony. They opened the palace gates, released the prisoners, and set the spire ablaze. The fire consumed everything. Gold banners, thrones, lies. From orbit, the flame could be seen like a second sun. Humanity had not come to conquer. It had come to end an empire. A warning in the stars. The fires of Varnax's Prime burned for a week. From the decks of the vigilant rain, Kyle watched the inferno swirl against the void, a second sun rising over the Dominion's grave. The once pristine spires had collapsed into molten ruins. The silver towers that had reached greedily toward the stars now lay broken and blackened. But the real fire burned across the galaxy. The footage Kyle had broadcast, the atrocities, the experiments, the hidden graves spread faster than any fleet worlds that had suffered in silence for generations now howled for justice. Slave planets erupted in revolt. Dominion loyalists defected or disappeared into the shadows. The Threx Empire, once invincible, fractured like old glass under the weight of its own sins. Kyle stood alone on the command deck, his armor scratched and scorched, his hands clasped behind his back. Around him, the War Council debated the next strikes, liberation plans, planetary sieges, uprisings to support. But Kyle wasn't listening. His eyes were on the stars. He no longer looked like the chained, half-blood boy who had knelt in the dust of Altherian. His armor gleamed in black and red, scarred by fire but unbroken. His voice, once ignored, now carried across star systems, sometimes in reverence, sometimes in fear. Behind him, Juno approached, her stride slow from a half-healed wound, but her presence undiminished. "You did it," she said simply. Kyle shook his head. "We did it." She smiled faintly. "You still don't get it, do you? You gave them something to believe in. You gave us thunder." Kyle turned back to the viewport, watching the slow ballet of liberation fleets forming above the ruined world. "I didn't ask to be a symbol," he said. "No one ever does," Juno replied. "But we don't get to choose who we become." At the far end of this deck, General Varun approached. He moved slower now, the cost of decades carried in every step, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "We're rebuilding," Varun said without preamble. "Ships, outposts, networks, not for empire, for warning." He tapped a holomap highlighting dozens of scattered systems once ruled by the Dominion. "There will be others," he said, "other tyrants, other empires. They'll look to the stars and think the past is forgotten." Kyle nodded slowly. "We'll remind them." Varun studied him for a long moment. "We could use a leader," the general said. "Someone who understands what this fight really means. Someone who remembers." Kyle looked at the stars, at the infinite dark filled with pain and hope, death and memory. "I'm no politician," he said. Varun's lips twitched into something close to a smile. "Good politicians lie. We need truth." Kyle said nothing. He didn't need to. They both knew his war wasn't over. It would never be over. Not while even one chain remained unbroken. Later, in a quiet ceremony held in the battered hangar of the Vigilant Rain, the first new emblem of the free worlds was unveiled, not a flag of conquest, but a broken chain ringed by a constellation of stars. Kyle stood at the edge of the gathering arms, crossed, watching as former slaves, former soldiers, former ghosts saluted the symbol not as vassals, but as survivors. He refused medals, refused titles. Instead, he kept a single memento, the scorched rocket launcher grip from the Battle of the Citadel, its metal twisted and worn. They told him it was a symbol of pride. To him, it was a reminder of why they fought. Not for banners, not for glory, but for every child who once looked at the sky and thought no one would ever come. Across the galaxy, the message Kyle had sent from Altherian replayed, hacked into Dominion systems, whispered in resistance cells etched onto prison walls. "My name is Kyle. I was born in chains. My parents died free. The Dominion thought we would break, but they forgot one thing. We are human and we never stay down." The stars changed. On Gorinth 7, enslaved workers rose up chanting his name. On Muria Prime, riots broke out under the spray-painted words, "We are human, We are thunder. In the broken cities of Varnaxis Prime, the statues of the sovereigns crumbled, their names erased by fire and time. Humanity had not come to build an empire. It had come to leave a warning. And across 1,000 systems in the silence before the next storm, the galaxy remembered. When Earth answers, it comes like thunder, not to conquer, not to rule, but to reckon. And Kyle, the boy who had once lain bleeding in the dust, stood at the center of it all, a spark that had ignited a fire the galaxy could never again put out. Not until every last chain was broken, not until every last cry was answered. And somewhere far beyond the burning worlds and shattered thrones, Kyle smiled, a small, fierce thing, as he whispered to the stars, "We're not done yet.